Okay, so today I'm going to talk about immigration and how we want to grow as a community. It is connected because when we're talking about our growth, we're talking about physical growth, more people, but also we're talking about cultural growth and identity, which always changes, which always has changed, and which is always affected by external influences coming here. You can't have more external influences coming here than immigration. So we do grow culturally and as an identity and physically. All countries do, and it's very important they do too. But the big problem um, is can we manage this change? That's the big difficulty. Okay, so from Article 9, which are the fundamental principles of the Constitution, in the Constitution, we can see that, you know, the the Italian value is to develop culture, to grow culture. Um, because it says, La Repubblica promuove lo sviluppo della cultura. Now, what do we mean? First of all, what do we mean by culture? Culture is a kind of collective personality. It's how we express ourselves collectively. If we think of the Italian culture, we can think of pizza, opera, Dante, Richard, no, we can think of, art, the Colosseum in Rome, the Fiat is football is Italian culture. It's all part of culture. Now, how do you develop this? So it promotes La Repubblica, promuove. La Repubblica, again, is everything that's public. Schools, the state, the local state, the national state, everything that's public must promote, so it must help the development. And what do we mean by development? So it must add to it. We're not talking about culture being frozen. This is the Italian culture and it doesn't change. It means it does change and it's added to. So maybe having English in schools has become part of the Italian culture. We had Latin in schools, but also now we've got English in all the schools. That's become part of our culture. We could say maybe the Catholicism is part of the Italian culture historically. So, it's really rooted in the Italian culture. But then maybe other religions can suddenly become part of our culture. When we've got lots and lots of people, citizens that worship Islam, then, Italy isn't just Christian, it's also Islamic, as a part of it that's Islamic. So this culture should develop. It shouldn't just stay the same. If we think of the American culture, in the past, we had, country music, and now we've got rap and blues. This is black music. So, that's added to its culture. American music is also rap and blues and jazz. And these are from the immigrants. So we really mean growing the culture, adding to it. And, that the best way to add to a culture is through the flows of people coming here. There's going to be certain cultures coming here, and they will enrich our culture. They will add to it, not substitute it, but add to it. And it's very important that our identity does move and our culture does develop. The fascists always wanted to go back or they wanted the culture frozen in a way in time, not no influences in to our culture, no diversity, contaminating our culture, they would say. But this is very dangerous in terms of, evolution. You're not going to evolve much unless you change, unless you can change and adapt and bring in new ideas and new ways of thinking and new visions of the world. Okay, so this is for a question for the class and also a discussion in small groups. Okay, so Scott Peck was a very famous psychologist that looked at creating community, the best way of creating authentic community, not just a very superficial community. We talk about community like, I don't know, maybe community of workers at Fiat, but real deep community. So, and that really is reducing barriers. It's about reducing barriers between people. People start to really think of each other and not be selfish and really act as a group, as a strong group. And he says there were 4 phases to creating this pseudo community. No, this true community. The first phase was pseudo community, and that's where people, were coming together. And this is characterized by a superficial sense of harmony, what you'd see on a bus, maybe talking about the weather or saying something very superficial about the state of the world. And here, the objective is to avoid conflict and difference. But you're not really entering any true connection, making a true connection. Next phase is chaos. And this is where the tensions begin to emerge. Actually, when we go through chaos, we seem to think that the community actually is breaking down, but it's not. Often it's differences beginning to emerge and people starting to defend their way of thinking and what they think and the way they see it. And maybe the tensions will go up if it's a very genuine attempt to create a community. The tension may go up as there's a little confrontation. The next phase is emptiness. Here we start to let go of our barriers like ego and prejudice and the need for control, and start trying to allow a certain amount of vulnerability which is necessary to create the bonds. This emptiness, maybe we're not so convinced of the way we see things, and we're allowing others to take control and letting go of how we prejudge things. But this is a long process. We're not talking about a short process. Scott Peck actually did this community building in organisations to try to create a proper community, because that was the way of getting, really, to get a very productive community. We need to become very communal, and have lots of ideas and feed off each other, and the end phase is true community, and that's defined by empathy, a feeling of, understanding each other, and a deep sense of acceptance among the members of each other. So that is what we want when we're talking about integration. We really need this to go through these phases of community building in a maybe different ways, over long or shorter time periods, but it's not so immediate. There is a process of, and it's a two-way process. It's not just foreigners adapting to us, but also us opening up to other ways of thinking. Right, in the 1980s, 1990s, we can see a failed integration process with the Rom community, which failed not just the Roms, but also Italy. Who knows why it failed, whose fault it was. Was it the Roms? Was it Italy's? But the integration process did fail, particularly because of the process itself, which was often to separate the Roms from the Italian community. So there was a kind of segregation of Roms in camps, in Turin, in Milan, in other parts of Italy, and they lived in camps, and obviously there was no integration. So it's very difficult to integrate unless you do have some sort of connection. So by a community living outside the mainstream community, there were barriers created, a distrust created, objectives that weren't common to all. The objectives of many of the Roms was to survive, and very difficult to get a job if you were a Rom from a camp. I've heard stories now of Roms becoming professors at university in Rome. There's a Rom, but he didn't tell him. He kept his identity secret for many, many years, became a professor, and then declared he was in fact a Rom. And there's lots of doctors and teachers that probably have the same story. The way to get on in Italy during the 1980s and 1990s, if you were a Rom, was to keep it secret and then find a path, a way of integrating outside of your identity. Many Roms became helps in the home, like coughs. But they didn't say they were Roms. They said they were from Bulgaria, or they said they were from other parts of Eastern Europe, but they had to keep their identity secret. And a lot of Roms from those camps have integrated through not declaring their Roms, hiding their identity. So it was a pity that there wasn't a proper strategy of integration, and this caused a lot of problems, not just for the Roms, but also for Italy, and a loss of cultural growth. Okay, so we can look at three types of immigration. We've got immigration from other EU member states. Now, with that immigration, it's not really a problem because we're already integrated. Our systems are integrated. Many of them use even the same currency. We have the same values protected by the same juridical system. We all belong to the same market, economic market. There's many of our laws are shared, so we can say that there's this freedom of movement in Europe because we're building one system. So we're already integrated. That's not a problem. Immigration from developed countries like Canada or maybe England normally is not a problem because normally we have very similar values and understandings and similar way of looking at the world, and often from developed countries there's no difficulty with resources because often they come with already resources to buy a house. They maybe have jobs lined up. They often speak English very well, so that's not a problem of communication. Often they're already integrated into a family if they're here because they're travelling for love, to marry someone Italian. Normally immigration from developed countries isn't a problem. They've got a lot to offer in terms of skills for a modern developed economy, etc. The real problem that happens with the immigrants from undeveloped countries, these immigrants have financial problems. They come often with just the clothes on their back, and they're escaping poverty or war or all sorts of tragedies, and this can be a problem for integration. They're often very different. The countries they come from are very different. There might be a dictatorship, might have religious practices that we find go against our values, repressing women, etc. So this can be the real problem of integration. And so normally we don't have any problems integrating, and there's no restrictions on member states, less restrictions on developed countries. Normally the integration process to become a citizen is much shorter for a developed citizen, country from a developed country. Maybe they have to wait 2 years, a little bit more, to become a citizen. But the integration process from undeveloped countries, often it takes 10 or more years before they're accepted as citizens, and the process is more difficult to get a job, learn the language, be able to communicate, have resources, find a network of people, a support network. These are the problems that they will face. Now, I talked about Scott Peck and how there's this chaos phase where there is a lot of tension and conflict comes out. And we see that in integrating foreigners. Often at the beginning, there can be differences that cause tensions, even with cultures that are very similar. Just thinking of, the English and the Italians, the way they queue up. The English become very angry if you don't queue up in a very orderly way, and an Italian that looks like he's going ahead will get some very angry people looking at him. And the English tend not to express their anger, but just to explode at a certain point. And the same with English coming to Italy. They might spend hours queuing up because everybody's jumping ahead and they're not, behaving the same way. They're patiently standing in the position, not pushing the case that it's their turn. This might cause a lot of anger for an Englishman in Italy. Another problem could be driving. Again, the English don't use their horns much and don't kind of always let you in. It's not very competitive driving. In Italy, it's a bit different. But the English tend to overreact. If you use your horn, you hoot another Englishman, you might end up with this, what we call road rage, where people just explode and there's a lot of violence happens because people tend to keep a lot of frustrations in, and when they feel abused, they overreact because they've got all those past feelings welling up inside them. So it can cause a lot of problems, but there's such subtle differences between the English and the Italians. For example, when I was at university, my fiance, who is now my Italian wife, I was driving to university, and I passed my fiance with all her shopping. I stopped, and I said, "Why don't you get in the car?" And she said, "No, don't worry." This was very early on in our relationship. She was being polite. And I thought she just wanted to be on her own because, the English are funny. We like our independence and sometimes we want to just think to ourselves. And I said, okay, and I drove off. And later she got very angry, saying, why didn't I give her a lift? And why didn't I insist? That was the whole purpose of her saying, rejecting the offer, was that I was supposed to insist, and I didn't know that. And so, there's little example of our differences and how they can really cause a little bit of misunderstanding or tension, or even worse, if it gets out of hand. So in some states, maybe you come from a very oppressive state where there's considerable violence or whatever, the problems will come here, the behaviours will come here, people will find it difficult just to adjust. So that process of integration, there might be periods of chaos and tension, and it's part of the process of integration. Yes, integration is a two-way process. The immigrants are different, and we, as a host country, are different, and the process should be a blending of this diversity to expand the culture. The identity. In England, we've had Indians come to England and set up their restaurants serving curry for many decades, and now the English national dish is in fact a curry. We can say it's very traditional on Friday nights to have a curry. and it's become part of our culture. So this integration shouldn't always be seen, shouldn't be seen as a one-way process, but as a two-way process, because it is changing the culture in which is being integrated in. You're creating something more enriched. Right, so the limits to integration is human rights. Italy has got its fundamental principles in the constitution that really are values that are not non-negotiable. And one of the main ones are human rights. These values cannot be accepted. So if, for example, a tradition, maybe somebody comes from a Muslim country and they have the burqa, which is in use there, and they insist their daughters must wear the burqa, that wouldn't be acceptable in Italy, because there has to be also the security. The burqa, I think the burqa was outlawed in Italy, full burqa, because of security risks. So you need to be able to show your face, but also for oppression. So you can't just insist that your family does as their tradition indicates, because if that indicates is oppressive in any way, that's not acceptable. So we do value diversity in Italy, and that's in the constitution, but that diversity mustn't violate human rights principles. I've given the example of the burqa, for example, but there are lots of others. Practices in England. There was an argument for Sharia tribunals that should be allowed. The Muslim community wanted Sharia tribunals to be allowed that could judge whether the religious law had been violated or not, and what the consequences should be, and that was obviously refused. We've got to remember the state has the monopoly of power, and the state makes the law, and there's no other systems that are acceptable within that system, unless that system accepts it. We've got a parliament in Scotland that makes a law that's a bit different from that in the whole of the United Kingdom. So that's part of our law, but not a religious court would not be acceptable. Religion and state must have a minimum of separation. Right, one characteristic that's very important to cultural growth is open-mindedness. Without open-mindedness, it will be very difficult to integrate new citizens. So, what do we mean by open-mindedness? We mean that we don't make judgments automatically from pre-assumed positions. We are able to take our time. We are open to change, to change our minds, and not to make judgments. People I mean, sometimes it's very important to make judgments and to make decisions, but there needs to be a process of time before you make your decisions, and you look at all different perspectives. You're not just making judgments according to your traditions and your way of doing things without making allowances that things could be different, and you know. So, for example, maybe we meet somebody who's from Japan and they're very humble. In that culture, being humble is very normal, and then somebody from America who is quite arrogant, it seems, because he likes to say how wonderful he is. But that's America's a very competitive and very like to push their cause and big themselves up. But if we judge these people according to our paradigm, we're going to become negative towards their behaviours. So I think we need a certain amount of open-mindedness that, you know, that it's possible to change and to be different and to have different behaviours. You know, in schools, for many years, the schools in Italy are very traditional, and for many years they found it very difficult to change. At the beginning, when I came here 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, you know, there's a lot of frontal lessons, then tests. Now, and doing group work was considered quite revolutionary and not correct, because you're not able to judge individually, or you know, being a teacher that's not really severe wasn't necessarily seen in a good light. So, you know, it had to change. It had to open up to difference, to being different. The Italian scholastic system. This open-mindedness is very important when it comes to immigration, when it comes to change, when it comes to you know, cultural growth. And I would say, you know, if you're closed-minded, now closed-minded people, let's think, sometimes it's appropriate. Maybe you're very convinced politically, and you've closed your minds, or you're very religious, and then you've got closed your mind, and you know, that's your personal choice. But when it comes to immigration, we really need to have open minds to stop the tensions or reduce the tensions and conflicts, possible conflicts. Now, the next screen, we're going to see how open-minded are you. So we're going to be able to judge you on that. Right, so if your father came home like this, full of tattoos, how open-minded would you be? Would you say, oh, that's okay? Or would you assume that he's gone mad and that's not the way to behave? Not many people are so open-minded that would be okay. And, you know, you do need a certain amount of prejudice in your mind, because, you know, you have your judgments about how to live your life. Now, when I was younger, there weren't many people with tattoos, especially young people didn't have tattoos. Now you see them in schools. Women, you hardly ever saw a woman with a tattoo. You see lots of women with tattoos now. So things do change. What we can assume was normal 30 years ago, 40 years ago, is not normal now. It's different. something. It's normal to see a woman with tattoos. So things do change, and open-mindedness also means you're open to change. You're open to evolution, if you like. Right, so the two main vehicles of integration are school and work, um, especially school. Uh, when young foreign kids go to school, they really go through a process of integration. They really have to learn to live together, start to understand what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, start to really see the the way an Italian sees the world, start to really learn the language. You know, in integration, we really need to learn just through behaving together. But you know, just see what, you know, if you get what's, for what reason you're stigmatized, for what reason you're looked up to, you know, how people react to you. You learn the barriers will come down. In a context like school, you will eventually understand exactly how you should behave in the subtlest ways. You'll understand it, and also how you can connect emotionally to others, because you know, you need to not just overcome conflict and tensions, but also be able to connect to others. What strategies to use to connect to other Italians. School is particularly good, and young people are particularly open-minded and able to change and to adapt and to integrate. So it's very useful if an immigrant is young and so can integrate so well. Also, ending up with Italian qualifications will mean that, you know, you have the what it needs to get a good job, and you've got the language, and you're recognised, so you can continue that integration into work. But work is also another place of integrating. You will have to overcome conflict and tensions from your difference. You'll learn what behaviours work and what don't in a social context, and people will share emotions, who overcome things, overcome, you know, disappointments and failures, and maybe achievements. You can achieve things together, and that will help you connect and feel a sense of common destiny together, and that will bring this sense of integration, feeling part, deeply embedded into a community, having the same destiny and empathy for the other. People do have a problem with globalization and rapid technological change, because this creates a kind of unstable environment where unpredictable change happens, and they just literally don't feel at home. Okay, so one minute they've got a job, the next minute maybe AI can do the job, or one minute they're used to communicating on a fixed phone, the next minute everyone's communicating on WhatsApp. So here in this situation, the older generations, and you see the picture, got an old man looking a bit bewildered and disoriented with the world and how it's become, you know, with his, you have to do your own be your own cashier in the shops, and you've got to communicate on WhatsApp and all the different. And then you've got workers, maybe they're losing a job, a picture of workers looking not very happy. And immigrants can really heighten this feeling of not being at home. You know, if there's lots and lots of new people in Italy, we're going to feel that change. We're going to feel less traditional and feel like our identity is changing. And that will create tension, and that is, you know, why we've got this rise in the far right, the part of the political spectrum that has been anti-immigrant. A lot of people want to hide in familiarity and tradition. They don't want this change. They're not so adaptable, especially if you haven't got many qualifications or you don't know many. You're not very mobile, or you're very old. Then this can be a problem, and that's what, you know, the basic the basic reasons why we have this movement against immigrants and the rise in the far right of the political spectrum. Okay, so traditionally we've had political parties ranging from the left to the right. There's been this spectrum, meaning equality, solidarity from the left versus freedom, economic freedom, a strong identity on the right. So that's what we've been looking for in our politicians. This is rooted in workers versus bosses, you know, of many years ago. But this isn't a history lesson. So, but what we can say is what we're seeing is a change in the spectrum towards internationalism versus nationalism. That seems to be the political spectrum that politics is revolving around. When we look at Trump, he's very nationalistic, very anti-globalization, resistance of internationalism, very anti-immigrant. Brexit was similar. We have changed a lot because globalization has become such an influence in our societies, and that is the tension now in our societies. Do we want to open up and become more internationalist, or do we want to close and become more nationalist? Now, what we found is that the extreme, the far right, the nationalists, are attracting the old who are not so happy with this globalization and this change, this, you know, unpredictable change technology brings, and also those that have not got the skills, so they're not so mobile and able to change a lot and to take advantage of globalization. They haven't got the resources to take advantage of globalization, maybe. These groups, big groups, have become much more nationalist, whereas the young, the very educated, those with resources tend to be more internationalist. You do also have a group of leaders like Trump and Boris Johnson who are very happy with nationalism because it gives the leaders, the political leaders, more power. Countries, politicians are constrained by international norms, rules, uh, limitations, because with globalization we have to adapt to a single market, for example. We have to be competitive. We can't think how we can organize our things, our country, our economy in a national way. We have to think what's acceptable to the international investors, for example, and international companies and international consumers. So there is this tension now in our politics between internationalism and nationalism. But I think really we've always this could lead to war. This nationalism could lead to war because we've always internationalized, and when we become more independent from each other and nationalists, and the national egos start blowing up, got this national egoism, we tend to have more and more tension between countries. So it is a bit of a dangerous path, this nationalism. Got to remember it's far right, less interested in human rights and democracy, and much more interested in getting as much as they can for the country, and not working with, not necessarily collaborating with other countries. This nationalism tends to be a bit more about me first. If all the countries were America first, or Italy first, or England first, eventually we will end up in serious conflict. Right, so Italy needs immigrants because Italy is not having babies. You can either have babies or accept more immigrants, because otherwise there's a huge problem. If we look at the photographs in the slide, we've got a very old photograph of a wedding where you've got lots of kids and not many old people. You've got one old person, lots of middle-aged people. In the more up-to-date photograph, we can see lots of old people, not many kids. Now, if we think about it, the people in the top photograph contributing to the pension of the old person is a lot. They don't have to pay much tax for his pension, whereas there's only a couple of people in the bottom photograph that can actually pay for the pension of all those old people in the second photograph, which is a huge problem. They'll be paying a huge amount of tax. It's not IMPS which pays the pensions, or it is IMPS, but it's not the contributions. The contributions disappear into a budget deficits. Italy's got a huge national debt. There's no fund there waiting to pay the pensions contributed by the people. The systems, the money doesn't exist. So it really is the workers, the people that are working, that pay the pensions, and it can't be done, basically. Look at the ranking, Italy's rank in aging population. The percentage of over 65s in the world, Italy is the second in the world for the most over 65s. Incredible. So this is a serious problem. Having children is a possibility, but it's also very expensive. Not many people now have kids or have a lot of kids. You know, you've got lots of people, maybe a few people with one kid, not many with two kids, and very rarely three. kids. So it is so expensive. We haven't got job security. Italians don't want to risk having lots of kids. That's the big problem. Immigrants are different. You know, they come and maybe they need some lessons in Italian, they need a house, a bit of rent, and then they can work. So it does change the situation a little bit, having immigrants instead of, you know, paying for kids for 25 years, which is very expensive. So there is, you know, the real need, a deep need for immigration, unless we choose to spend a lot more on children. Just imagining competition in the world. For Italy, not having any many young people, having a very old population, is a bit like having a football team playing against another football team which with a lot less players. So, you know, if Italy doesn't have immigrants, there's an aging population, you're going to find it a problem to compete, to find the human resources. And I'm talking, you know, about human resources which are not just, you know, there are unemployed people in Italy. So you could imagine that we've got a surplus, but we haven't. Italy hasn't got a surplus of doctors, it hasn't got a surplus of plumbers, it hasn't got a surplus of painters, etc., etc. There is a shortage in lots and lots of professions, and that is exactly like trying to, you know, produce with less players on the pitch. A lot of the young people are unemployed because they haven't yet entered the market in Italy. That's one big problem. But it's not that, you know, we don't need workers. Often the young workers are looking for a very specific job. Or maybe there's lots of people in between work, or maybe short term, or maybe there's a problem in a specific area. But there is a shortage of workers in lots and lots of fields, in lots of areas in Italy. So this question needs to be approached. Do immigrants take jobs and resources? Yes, they do. They take jobs. They're offered work. They're going to take it. That means no one else can do that job. But they also create jobs because they spend money. They need houses. They need food. They need clothes. And so they will increase aggregate demand, what we call aggregate demand. And so that creates jobs. So they don't just take jobs, they create jobs. Do they take resources? Yes. They need hospitals, they need language learning, but they also create resources. They pay taxes, they work, they contribute. We all take resources. We all need hospitals and education, but in fact, quite often immigrants take less resources. The average Italian is a lot older and needs a lot more help from the state than the average younger immigrant. So, but then we can talk in class about how immigrants increase the size of the pie, not just take a part of the pie. So it's not just about, you know, there's not a fixed pie, which we, you know, if we've got too many people, there's not enough to go round. By having more people, we can actually increase the pie exponentially in a synergic way, So by having more people, you can have more ideas, You're going to have more contacts abroad, export, etc., etc.